Order. Welcome to this session of the Transport Select Committee. Before we start, can I ask colleagues if anyone has any declarations of interest for the record?
Yeah.
Chris?
So I have been a member of two of the three unions represented here today. That's the RMT and the TSSA. And I have worked indirectly for two of the witnesses in panel 2.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. In former times, before privatisation, I worked for British Rail and I was a member of the NUR, which was a forerunner of the RMT. I was also a member of the TSSA, and I'm also a member of a number of trade union groups, including ASLEF and the RMT parliamentary group.
Thank you. Anyone else of declaration?
I'm a member of the RMT parliamentary group.
Thank you. Good morning to our panel. Thank you for your time this morning. Just for the record, could I ask you to give your name and position, starting Mr. Whelan.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Mick Whelan. I'm General Secretary of the Train Drivers Union, ASLEF.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Frank Ward, Interim General Secretary of the TSSA.
Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. Mick Lynch, General Secretary at RMT.
Thank you. My colleagues and I will have a number of questions for you all this morning, and we'll delve into what is quite a complex situation. But before we do, I just want to put the session in context. We're hearing from yourselves in this part of the session. Later we'll be hearing from Network Rail and the Rail Delivery Group, and next week we'll be having the Rail Minister in front of us. What I'm hoping we get out of these sessions is to get some greater clarity on where we are with the dispute and what the prospects are of a resolution sooner rather than later. So before we delve into the specific issues, can I just ask the three of you, in very broad terms, how close are we to having these disputes resolved? On a, let's say, on a scale of 1 to 10, whereas 1, you remain on different planets, 10, I can go out and buy a hat for the wedding. Where are we, Mr. Whelan?
Thank you, Chair. I think you include 0 in your 1 to 10, and we're further away than when we started.
Okay, that's clear. Mr. Ward?
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Okay, Mr. Lynch?
I wouldn't be able to say. It depends on discussions. I'm not going to use a scale, but we haven't got an agreement, and until we get an agreement, we're not close to it, really.
Okay, well, that's not as optimistic as I'd hoped. So, are discussions happening at the moment?
No.
Okay.
We've been invited to discussions tomorrow.
Yeah, discussions are... We had a discussion with Network Rail yesterday, and we'll be having one with the RDG, Rail Delivery Group, for the TOCs on Thursday. And
can you see... Start with you, Mr. Lynch, because you seem to be the most positive of the three, although it's relative. Where do you see a possible landing zone for an agreement? Is it on pay? Is it on the wider conditions? Industry reform? Where do you see a possible zone for coming to an agreement?
Well, all of those issues have to be dealt with. Our dispute that we put to the companies is based on job security, so they wanted to make thousands of redundancies. That may change to lower thousands or into hundreds, we don't know. That's Network Rail and the TOCs. We have got an issue about what they're calling modernisation. And there are some aspects of modernisation, development of the railway and development of working conditions and terms and conditions and contractual elements. But we're a long way on pay. I mean, the inflation rate that we use for this year is currently in excess of 14%. And that's the one that the railway use. The previous offer we had is 4%. The cumulative inflation for 22 and 23 will be in excess of 20%. We've been offered on the TOCs 8% for those 2 years, so it's less than half, and we've been offered 9% by the Network Rail, which is less than half again. But let's not forget, we haven't had a pay rise in many of these companies for 3 and 4 years. So we are having our wages reduced, spending power at the supermarket, and with the energy companies and everything else, year on year on year, and every week that passes it gets worse. They're also seeking such drastic changes, such as the elimination of ticket offices in Britain. There will be no, under their current proposals, which are sponsored and put forward by the Department for Transport, there will be no ticket offices. And the last version of the offer that we had from the talks, there will be no guards either. So these are very stark choices. Plus they want to dilute all of our contractual terms and conditions virtually. So it's a very strong challenge for us. And even if a revised package comes forward on that basis, which includes elements as far as the government wants to be addressed, and this is completely directed by the government in every element, I don't know if any of our members will go anywhere near accepting those proposals. They are such profound changes that they'll be very difficult for any union to accept. And one of the previous times I was here, we had the P&O chairman and said, no, he said to us, to this committee, no union in its right mind would accept what I want to propose or would have proposed. And we're in similar territory with the railways at the moment. So the landing zone will have to deal with all of those elements, as it's called, but I can't see the landing zone from here. We'll have to see what the talks say, and I don't know what our members will make of that when they get to read this stuff in detail.
And Mr. Ward, your union settled with one of the disputes, but remain, that was with Network Rail, but you remain in dispute with the RDG.
Yep.
From what you agreed with Network Rail, can you see a sort of spillover, if that's the correct phrase, to reaching a settlement with the RDG?
Well, we had two agreements with Network Rail, one on behalf of management staff, which we entered into last August, and then one on behalf of general grades and controllers, which was settled in December. The concerns of our members were addressed in those claims. We put both offers to the members and they voted overwhelmingly to accept them. We're in a totally different situation with the RDG, and we talk about talks through the RDG. The reality is that we continue in talks with the RDG. We get to a stage whereby we think there's been some progress made. They go back to talk to their paymasters and everything unfurls in front of us. We get an offer for the RDG that bore no relationship in parts to the talks that we just concluded. The offer that was on the table is significantly different from what we settled on with Network Rail. Does Network Rail one form some sort of template? Yeah, it probably does. It's something that we could look at. There's different parts of the package that we would have to discuss with the RDG, but it does suggest a way forward, but nothing more than that.
Thank you. We'll come on to specifically negotiations with the RDG in a moment, but my final question for the moment, Mr. Whelan, you said you were zero in terms of likelihood of a settlement. Can you expand on that a little, please?
Yes, last week, late on a Friday evening, leaked to the press before we'd even had a chance to look at it or see it or open the email, was a deal that was sent out that contained many of our red lines, many things we hadn't discussed, and actually smashed the enabling agreement we have, because we don't deal with the RDG, we don't recognise the RDG. We're working through a group called the RIRG, and the three trade unions signed up to an enabling agreement with them. Part of that enabling agreement, of course, was that certain parts of the railway were excluded from severance, including signal persons, guards and drivers. Receive a deal telling me that there's going to be no compulsory redundancies till 2024. Also, the deal told us what our people would do, where we would negotiate, and broke the arrangements within the enabling agreement about how we would cascade any broad brush agreement we might have made at a national level. My board, my executive committee, will deal with that next Monday. I'm naturally being questioned all the time on what my view on that deal is. I'm incredibly open that I cannot recommend any one element of it, and it may destroy the ability to go back to those talks in future.
Okay, well, we'll delve into some of these points, and obviously we've got the other side of the table coming to us in just under an hour's time. But can I hand over to Paul? Do you want to
thank you, Chair.
The next questions?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I don't envy anybody trying to do any of these sort of negotiations right in the public domain, which you guys have to. But just in terms of, I'm going to be directing this particularly at Mr. Lynch and Mr. Ward in the first instance. I'll go to you first, Mr. Ward, if I can. But I want to understand why you rejected the Rail Delivery Group's initial offer. And, you said that it had contained elements which had never been discussed, and then that there was it admitted significant points that had been negotiated. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I mean, I thank you, by the way, for the submissions that we got from some of you.
Driver only wasn't part of the discussions that we'd been having recently with the RDG, and the talks that we'd been having made some progress. When they came back with a formal offer in reference to driver only, it just came out of nowhere for us. So much so that I asked our negotiators, when did we start talking about this? And I was told quite categorically that we hadn't been talking about it at all.
There's been no reference at all to DO?
No, but there are things within the offer that were just totally unacceptable to us. It's a pay offer, 4% for last year and 4% for this year. As Mr. Lynch has quite rightly referred, inflation for the rail industry is running at 14%. 4% will not help a lot of our lower paid members. The deal that we done with Network Rail was 5% in 2022 and 4% in 2023, but with a minimum of $1,750 for lower paid workers. There's no bottom for lower paid workers in the RDG offer. We are asked to make commitments in terms of delivering on the modernisation, as they refer to, within the railway, that we will not take any industrial action between signing off the agreement and April 2024. At the same time, we're being given a commitment that there will be no compulsory redundancies before the 1st of April 2024. So they can come and propose compulsory redundancies in January 24, enact them in April 24, and we can't take any industrial action about it until after those people have been made compulsory redundant and left the industry. It's just not acceptable. In addition to that, there were offers for Network Rail to improve terms and conditions, which we don't get anything. We don't get anything from the Rail Delivery Group in terms of terms and conditions. So there's not even a sweetener there for our members as far as that's concerned. The Network Rail no compulsory redundancy agreement ran to January 2025. Clearly, members working for train operating companies are asking why those employees in the rail industry who work for Network Rail have got no compulsory redundancy to January 25 and theirs is only April 24, and what plans their employers might have for them. So it creates a lot of uncertainty. It doesn't address the concerns in regards to pay, and there was nothing else that would sweeten it as far as our members were concerned. We consult with our representatives before we decide what to do with any offer that we get for the employer, and every single one of our representatives turn around and says this just won't wash.
So you'd be looking, not trying to put words in your mouth too much, but in terms of the structure of a deal, the way that the one you've accepted sat with a bias towards the lower paid employees getting a slightly higher percentage, that's the sort of thing that could be a step in the right direction. Is that a fair comment?
It would be a step in the right direction. What would also be a step in the right direction would be an offer for management staff and an offer for controllers.
Which you haven't received yet?
We've not received any offer for management staff and controllers, and it is notable that when we've done the deals with Network Rail, the first deal that we settled was for management staff. That was the first offer that we got, and we settled with them in that. We've not even had an offer, and we've asked repeatedly for offers for both those groups of staff, and we've been told that they don't have the authority for the DFT to make us any offer.
Okay, just coming back to the driver-only operation just for a second. You said that it just suddenly brought into the discussions at a late point. I mean, I think any casual observer of what's going on in the railways at the moment would be aware that there's pressure from government and others to come up with more driver-only operations. So I'm a little bit surprised that it was a surprise, if you see what I mean. Even if I understand what you're saying, that it doesn't seem to have been specifically looked at. Can I just ask one question on DO? Is it something that you just don't see as being feasible at all, or is it the fact that you're worried about the fact that it's being pushed too comprehensive? I noticed from some of the submissions that you talk about the cases where combining DOO with a ticketless station puts all sorts of vulnerability risks because of the two. Are there spaces where you would see that driver-only operation is still practical, though? Or is it just a no complete? I'm just trying to understand whether it's a partial stop or a full stop.
Who you ask? Because Frank doesn't have guards in his...
I was going to
We will not accept driver-only operation in any company without fight. We'll never sign up to accepting DOO. It will never happen while I'm the General Secretary. It will never happen as long as the RMT exists. So it's not very clever in a negotiation, in my opinion. And it is the DFT that have insisted on this, not the executives that are coming in to see you. They'll have to do what they're told because that's what the contract says. The contracts that these train operators have with the DFT says, one, that the Secretary of State is entirely responsible for their industrial mandate, their negotiating mandate. Two, he has to approve a dispute handling programme. And three, they will make no communication with the trade unions without his prior approval, including writing a business-as-usual letter. So if I write to any train operating company, they have to inform the DFT within 3 working days with what the contents of that letter. And that includes phone calls and discussions as well, according to the contract. So nothing happens in this industry without the Secretary of State and the 50 people in the DFT today that are working on this dispute and what they call workforce reforms. 50 people working full-time besides the politicians right now. So they insisted right at the end, and if the executives involved in this industry told you the truth, they will tell you that they knew before they put that on the table it would be rejected. And Mr. Whelan will speak on his behalf because there's 2 sets of people on these trains. So it's just not very bright to do that. Why would you, if you're seeking a solution to a serious industrial dispute that's high profile, would you wait until a Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock to put 9 clauses into a document which weren't in the previous version? It's daft. And to me, it's sabotage. And they wanted these strikes to go ahead. They knew that going forward with the imposition of change in Network Rail and DOO would provoke a reaction. They got the reaction. They let the strikes go ahead over Christmas. They didn't lift a telephone or lift a finger to get them off. They brought forward stage-managed releases in the last week about minimum service levels, about disruption and all the rest of it, about me and various other people in the industry, all primed through certain press outlets. And the whole thing has been completely stage-managed leading up to Monday's sessions with the trade unions, as far as I can see. So it's a deliberate torpedoing of the talks which could have developed. That's why DOO was in there, not because it would have helped resolve the dispute.
Okay, I'm going to try and stick to the question that I asked in the first place, which is about DOO, because I know that my colleagues are going to come back round in discussions and questions about the specific of government intervention or not, and you have the opportunity to go through that in a little bit more detail then. So really, you're saying there's absolutely no way that any train will run with DOO?
We will never accept that we introduce the removal of more guards from trains. No, we won't accept that. And we won't continue with any talks that has that as a prerequisite.
I'll leave that one there, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Jack.
Thank you, Chair. And
sorry, Mick, I should have come.
Sorry, Chair, would you like to know the view of the Train Drivers' Union on driver-only operation?
My apologies. Yes.
No, I don't want to cut across you if you didn't want to know. Quite simply, I've given evidence to this body before in the Southern dispute. Our position remains the same. The train drivers who do it hate it, feel it's unsafe. We believe it's inherently unsafe. Prior to the pandemic, the whole industry was moving in a different direction. all the travelling public, all passenger focused, and everybody wanted visible presence and a safe presence in every train. We've seen sexual assaults in our railway increase by 180%. We had county lines and drugs. We had areas where people were refusing to move without security guards on trains at certain times of night. Unfortunately, society hasn't got more polite, it hasn't got more safer. And since then, also the Rail Safety and Standards Board is designated that train drivers are lone workers. So every role has to be re-evaluated in light of us being those lone workers. So where there is no staff on stations, where there's nobody in booking offices, and where there's nobody on trains, right, we do not believe it's a safe railway for the travelling public. But also, we do believe that you need everybody in all those positions to run a safe railway, and we will not be supporting DOO if it comes forward as part of this deal or any future deal in the future.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Jack, just in a second.
Yes,
I've got one quick question. Is there a difference from your perspective from driver-only operated and driver-controlled operated, i.e. there is another person on the train, they might not be opening and shutting the doors?
No. It's about dispatch. It's about our Victorian infrastructure. It's about DOO was delivered at a time when we had 3-car trains and you dropped the window light on the side and you could see back along the length of the train. It wasn't designed for 12 and 13-car trains with 1,300 people on and one body to protect them. And if that one body gets injured or has a medical incident, there is nobody to look after the travelling public. That was not what DOO was designed for. Also, DOO initially was in intensive urban areas where there was a station every couple of minutes. Modern proposals are for DOO everywhere, where maybe 27, 30 minutes or even an hour between stations, where anything can happen to the travelling public and there is no protection. And we cannot support that.
I want to come to Jack, but
that's just a slightly different position that's been taken there, Chair. I just wanted to just come back on that just slightly.
very quickly, because
Just in the sense that, you're saying that it's not appropriate for the long big trains, but the little ones is where it was introduced in the first place. Is there therefore not still a window for some use in certain environments? That's
okay.
I don't believe so. I think the real problem with the nature of modern society and the dangers to the travelling public and to the staff on the railway preclude anybody from working alone.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Chair. And my questions are mainly to Mr. Whelan. And first, around an offer on paying conditions. Have you received an offer from RDG?
Well, the first I knew was when my media person rang me up and said, "What do you say about the offer?" If I can go slightly backwards to explain the chronology, it might assist. I'd been approached by Mr. Montgomery, who you're going to speak to later, the Friday of Christmas week, saying, "Can we meet next week?" I'd met Mr. Harper and Mr. Merriman prior to that, and they said they were going to put Mr. Merriman in to facilitate the talks, and we were awaiting that meeting before we went into further talks, because we thought that was due decorum and we needed to understand the role of the Rail Minister in the facilitation of the talks. But also pointing out that at a point in time that, unfortunately, like anybody else, my negotiating team has a right to take leave, and we had no availability. 2 of the 3, and I'm one of the team, were out of the country and not available, and we couldn't have met anyway. I then, not surprisingly, very quickly received an email from the Rail Minister's Department saying, could we meet? And we met on Monday, which was the first available slot, for the same reason that I gave to the negotiators of the RIRG. So, to my surprise, I did have a text from Mr. Montgomery on the Friday morning, and he was on my list of people to ring back when I finished my other things I had to do that day. Could we talk? But my first knowledge of the deal that contained so many red lines and so many things we hadn't discussed was when we were being asked by the press our view on the deal. I went back through my emails later, after having said I hadn't said the deal, to find out that I had been sent an email at 15:18.
So in terms
and then
of
the press release went out 20 minutes later.
So in terms of the deal that you've been offered, which aspects of that are acceptable to your members and which aspects are not?
There is not one line in that deal, from the opening comments to the final full stop, that I could recommend, because the deal basically says that we rip up every agreement we have, local and national, forever and a day, have no right to negotiate in future, and it'll be forced upon our members in the talks, which was not what we agreed within the enabling agreement. What we agreed as joint trade unions in the enabling agreement, that we would agree at a high level things be passed down to our 15 negotiating groups on the talks, and then they would then negotiate separately on those items if they could. And if they could then make a recommendation, we would then put that to our members in those different companies. Part of the difficulty we have is there isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. I've got companies, because of the fractionalisation of the railway and the cutting and carving up of the map, I've got 3 sets of drivers on different conditions in one company. So every deal and every aspect of a deal may impact upon those terms and conditions and the ability to do a deal in a different way.
What would you like to see in a deal to make it so that it would be near to something that you would accept?
I think we're very much getting to the point whereby after 4 years without a pay offer, a significant pay offer, that we need a clean pay offer to move forward, to get out of the current strife that we're in, to go back to the table clean, to look it forward. Most of what's contained in that deal, there's no modernisation in that deal, there is no reform. It is basically a productivity grab. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds of productivity for nothing, for a 20% cut in pay. And strange enough, I do see the role of trade unions to protect the standards of living of the people they represent.
Do you recognise that there is a need to modernise certain terms and conditions?
And in the areas where we have to modernise, I think I'm the person that signed off ATO under St Pancras. I think both my colleagues have made public statements about where we've facilitated modernisation before. There hasn't been a major project in the UK in the last 23 years that hasn't happened without the buy-in and the willingness of the trade unions. We want to grow railways. I don't want my people dying because there's no toilets on trains and using tenant products. I don't want my people using semaphore signals and going to 2 colour lights, 3 colour lights, and then ATO. I actually want a green railways at the centre of a green revolution, that we decarbonise and we deliver Kyoto, Paris and whatever. What we're currently seeing, unfortunately, is a modernisation. It's a pure productivity grab of a wish list of all the things that various companies couldn't achieve in the last 2.5 decades, because in many occasions they couldn't afford them, unfortunately.
In terms of pay increases, given that the average driver salary is more or less double the average salary in my constituency, would you expect that it's right for my constituents to have to pay more to fund these increases to driver salaries?
I find it rather intriguing, because we don't work for the DfT. We don't work for the Treasury, we don't work for the government. I've got 15 different disputes with 15 train operating companies who are declaring profits and paying dividends. In any other economic organisation, you would do your fixed costs, including pay first, before you declared any dividends or any profits. And I look around the industry and I see the high profits of the Roscoes and the venture capitalists. It seems very much to me that we find ourselves in a very Monty Python-esque world, whereby you now want the funders to fund the profits of the shareholders to keep the private interest within the industry itself, and that isn't going to happen.
I don't think you've answered that question, but anyway, in terms of driver salaries, do you not think that drivers are already relatively well paid?
No. Okay. And if I can explain why.
What would you consider to be a fair pay then, in terms
Well, if drivers were on whatever salary they were within the range 4 years ago, I'd like at least nice to see them stand still. You know,
what sort of figure would you like?
We haven't put a figure on it. We deliberately haven't, because that was also part of the enabling agreement, that it would go down to the various companies to be discussed. Because a one-size-fits-all solution, you could only do a broad brush range of things for people to discuss that would facilitate a deal going forward. Now, we've never put a price on it, and ultimately the opportunity cost of either the productivity or the high cost of living will be determined by the people who vote on the deal.
You're trying to negotiate when you don't even have a figure of how much you want to accept.
I may have a figure in my head, but in negotiation...
You're not share it with us today.
I haven't shared it with the media, haven't shared it with anybody in the last 12 months or more. We're waiting to see what can be achieved in the negotiations we have, and actually what people are putting on the table. But what was thrown out to the press last week and sent to us by email wasn't even part of the discussions that we'd had. And where it had been part of discussions, many of them had been red lines. So again, echoing what Mr Lynch said, people deliberately scuppered any chance of a deal by putting out things that had already been declined.
Thank you, Chair.
Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. I'd like to start with Mr Whelan, if I may. Mick, can you just tell us, are you a member of the Labour Party's Executive Committee?
I am.
Could you also confirm if you are chairman of the Labour Party group of affiliated trade unions, otherwise known as TULO?
It's my proud privilege to be the chair of the Labour affiliated trade unions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you receive any direction from the Labour Party in these discussions or negotiations?
Excuse me for laughing. Unfortunately, no. I've had no discussions with anybody. We have briefed people in the shadow cabinet on our position as a trade union, but there has been no direct discussion or policy in relation to this dispute coming from the leadership of the Labour Party. And I think it's a matter of public record, my view on MPs and others attending picket lines.
Thank you very much.
Which is in direct opposition to my leader at this moment in time.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that the RMT has attended 4 meetings with the department and or the minister. Could you just tell us how many meetings you've attended, please?
With which minister? I've had 3 in a month.
Well, the minister, one of the ministers for transport. How many meetings have you had with the department for transport?
In recent times, never met Mr. Shapps in person. I'm sorry, I'm trying to work it out for you. Sorry, bear with me. I've never met Mr. Shapps in person. Had one meet and greet with Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Unfortunately, wasn't there very long. Met Mr. Harper for the first time once before Christmas, and I've met Mr. Merriman, the Rail Minister, twice. Once with Mr. Harper before Christmas, and once to the meeting I alluded to earlier this Monday.
Okay, so you've met DFT twice.
I haven't met the DFT at all.
Well, ministers of the DFT.
I've met the ministers. The question was, had I met the DFT? I have not met the DFT in any capacity. Okay. There have been members of the DFT writing down every word I say when I go into these meetings with the ministers, but they haven't spoken, they haven't contributed, they haven't asked any questions, and we haven't had any dialogue with them, if that's your question.
Yeah, thank you. Could you just tell us what's the best offer that you've received so far from the RDG in respect of a TOG?
The only offer we received in 4 years was the one that was leaked to the press last Friday.
So I understand that ASLEF refused an offer from Merseyrail of a 19% pay offer. Could you just tell us why that was?
We've done a deal on Merseyrail. I don't recollect the 90% offer.
So 19% over 2 years, I understand?
Right, so we've done a deal with Merseyrail, so we've accepted the deal's gone out to ballot. We were waiting for the result of that ballot, so we've recommended that deal to our members.
Yeah, okay, so in which case you have accepted an offer?
I think sometimes people don't understand how trade unions work, and you've been a member of 2 of the rail unions, so you know that when an offer is made, it goes to the people that have to actually do the conditions, whatever, and they decide whether it's acceptable or not. So we have a member-driven policy that we don't put any deal out that we can't recommend. Yeah. If we can recommend a deal, we put it to the people that have to do it, and then they tell us whether it's viable or not.
I see. So that has been that deal has been done, and you have agreed that offer for Merseyrail.
I think the result comes in next week.
Okay.
To my knowledge, but if that's incorrect, I will come back to you.
That's all right, and that's the only operator. That's the only operator you've accepted an offer from.
No, we've done deals. We've currently done deals in Hull trains. Okay. Quite obviously, because it's a Westminster problem, we've done deals in Wales and Scotland.
Yep.
And we had a number of long-standing multi-year deals in place. We've done deals with Crossrail.
Yep.
So we have done deals.
Could you just tell us? Are you in dispute with any freight operators?
Yes.
That's which ones?
Sorry, we represent all the freight operators.
I know, but I mean, they're separate companies.
Yeah.
So as far as I
understand, most of the freight operators we've had above RPI offers with no strings.
Yeah. So have you accepted any?
I would have to go back. In the last couple of years, we have done deals with various freight operators. The actual content of those deals I can provide to the committee subsequently.
We'd be grateful for that. But currently, you're not in dispute with any of the freight operators?
No.
No, okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Frank, could I come to you next, please? Band 1 to 4, Management Band 1 to 4 of Network Rail, you collectively represent. Could you just tell us what the highest salary is within that band that you collectively bargain for on behalf of them?
No, I would have to come back to you in writing on that.
I understand that highest salary to be £190,000.
That may well be the case. I mean, there are people...
So can you just repeat that? I couldn't hear.
That may well be the case, but I would have to go and check it and come back to you. I mean, there are people in Network Rail that are paid more than that as well, out with bands 1 to 4, the CEO is paid, over $500,000.
Yeah. And could you just confirm you accepted or came out of a dispute quite early on with that management ban, didn't you?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Could you just tell us why that was?
Our management members voted to take industrial action, first time ever in my recollection. And ultimately, when we started talking, we got an offer. As is our normal practice, we put the offer to the representatives who believed that it was worthy of going to the members. We put it to the members, and the members voted overwhelmingly to accept it.
Yeah.
That's why we came out of dispute.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Mick, Whelan, can I just come back to you one final question? In October last year, we understand it that the general secretaries of a number of trade unions, as well as members of the shadow cabinet, attended a fully funded visit by the TUC to go to Spain to meet your counterparts there to discuss the sorts of issues you face and in effect get hints and tips. Would you just confirm for us whether or not you joined that visit, or any representative of ASLEF joined that visit?
No representative of ASLEF was on that visit.
Thank you very much. Mick, Lynch, could I come to you next? Briefly. In December, Network Rail put an offer, I think, to you on behalf of your members of 9% over 2 years, with a minimum...
3 years. You get anything last year?
Okay, thank you. With a minimum of a £1,750 value for 2022. Am I right in saying that those who were paid under 35,000 would have in effect had a better offer than that because of the minimum threshold?
Yeah, there's what we call an underpin, which is RMT's policy that there should always be an underpin or some mechanism that advances the lower paid, because continued percentage increases give them, over an evolving period, a worse deal. So that's something we're seeking from all employers and have been successful in over 20 years or more in improving lower paid wages. But it's not an offer of pay, it's an offer of, as the DFT calls it, reform and modernisation. It's a package deal, so it's conditional on accepting major changes to a whole range of things.
Would you be willing to share with us the details of what that offer has been so we can see it?
Yes, it's in the public domain, I think. It's been put on, it's on the Network Rail website, it's on our website, it's sent to all our members. I think it's broadly available. It's quite a long document. There's a document with it called Modernising Maintenance. There's some elements for signallers and others, and station grades as well.
Would you just confirm to us why the RMT only gave a period of 6 days for the referendum of the last offer rather than the standard 14 days that you would typically do?
Well, we don't have a standard. We arrange the referendums in the way that suits the needs of the dispute. So what was happening in Network Rail at that time was the commencement of the change that we hadn't agreed. So they told us that they were due to go to what local consultation or second level consultation on the changes, which would mean the actual rearrangement of the teams and the cuts to the jobs that they want to bring in, and the initiation of...
Come back to the specific...
So that's why... Well, that is the specific. We needed to get the referendum result in before those changes happened. So the clock was set ticking by the company. They said to us, we're going to implement these changes from the 15th of December. So we needed an answer as to whether it was found acceptable before that happened.
I understand on the 6th of December an increasing number of groups of members of the RMT broke the strike. Could you just tell us what percentage of members did actually break the strike on those days?
We don't have a report of any increase in people breaking the strike. We know that, as you've just heard from the TSSA, that the managers and Unite and the white collar and supervisory staff have gone back to work, so they're not on strike. They've been on strike with us previously. Our picket lines are solid. The action that we have taken has had the same effects as it has on day one as it is having in the last week or so.
Are there any final points you'd like to just share with us in terms of your current negotiating position with Network Rail?
Well, we will continue to talk to Network Rail, and it will continue to be a challenge. You're going to hear from Tim Shoveler. I spoke to him yesterday afternoon. We were always talking to these companies to try and work up solutions to the problems that we've jointly got. And we'll continue to do that, but it remains a challenge. The demands that have been made on us are very difficult for us to accommodate, and ultimately we feel those demands and the inflation rate means that our members' work is being undervalued by vast amounts. But that is a deliberate policy of the government in this country at the time, to lower wages of working people right across the spectrum, especially where they have an influence, to make them poorer than they used to be. And I think that's a direct result of government policy.
Chairman, back to you.
Okay, thank you. Gavin.
Thanks so much, Chair. I probably should declare before I start I'm unencumbered by entreaties from the Labour front bench, and was proud to support the workers at Glasgow Central last week. But we move on to the role of government in the dispute. And bizarrely, during the dispute, we've had three entirely different ministerial teams at the DFT. I wonder, and I'll start with you, Mr. Whelan, what role the government, or what role each of those teams have played in the dispute thus far, and what difference there has been between the approach of the three teams, if I could?
I think there's been a constant interference in the free collective bargaining process by all the teams. Increasingly there seems to be a generation of bad faith driven from behind the scenes. We've seen that in what happened with putting clauses into the RMT deal that hadn't been discussed, and I believe the leaking of the deal and the putting the deal out to us last week. I don't believe that's been done without any discussion, because as we know, before anything can come out, discussion has to happen with the DFT and the relevant minister. So everything that's happening is, we believe, currently government driven. And we have no way of affecting that.
Has there been any improvement with the new ministerial team compared to the previous two iterations?
We've had an offer from Mr Harper that Mr Merriman will help facilitate future talks. Unfortunately, that's been scuppered by what happened last Friday, because at this moment in time there is no future talks for him to facilitate. We would hope there would have been an ownership role within those talks. I think Mr Merriman made it quite clear that he was just there to facilitate meetings and how it would work in future. We live in hope that it will help.
Mr Ward, same question to you in terms of the different approach of...
Mr Sharp's was non-existent as far as we were concerned. We foresaw difficulties with our 2022 pay claim as early as December 21. We submitted claims to the majority of the employers and get no responses whatsoever. We repeatedly contacted employers asking for meetings, get very little movement from the employers on that. We wrote on a number of occasions to Mr Sharps and asked him if he could use his influence to engage the employers before we went into dispute, get no responses whatsoever. So as far as we're concerned, it just wasn't there. Miss Trevelyan wasn't there really long enough to make a difference, to be honest, in this. And to be honest, the dispute almost went into hibernation during the leadership, the Tory leadership campaign. So that's just not worth much more comment on that. The current team is slightly different. They engage. We've had a number of meetings with either the Secretary of State or with the Rail Minister. They continually offer to use their offices to try and facilitate an agreement. However, the evidence that we get from the RDG in particular is that they cannot make any agreement without sign off from the DFT and the government ministers, and consequently any time we make any progress, it goes back and then it comes back and it's changed again.
Mr Lynch.
Yeah, so I believe this whole situation, the dispute and all the elements of it have been conceived in the DFT, going back to when Mr Heaton Harris was the Rail Minister under Mr Shapps. So this is Mr Shapps' project, if you like, and this dispute is his bequest to the rest of us that we've all got to deal with. And I believe he's still involved quite heavily when the documents go round Whitehall. I think there's a steer from the business department, and that's fine. But Mr. Harper and Mr. Merriman are very pleasant to deal with. They're a much better relationship. I think we'd all say that. On a one-to-one and dealing with, even I'm sure with the employers, it's a much better relationship. But I always say it's about product. The template has been set by previous administrations in the DFT, and there is a strong hand of the Treasury on top of all of that about what's going on. And they say to us directly that we cannot move very far on this, the merits of your own dispute, because what it will say about health, education and every other public servant that we've got involved with all the issues going on now. But it is, you can tell it is, because in ScotRail we've made a settlement. In Transport for Wales we've all made settlements. Merseyrail, which is outside their bounds, settlements. Tyne and Wear Metro, outside the DFT, settlements. London Transport, settlements. Everywhere where the DFT's hand is not the control on the tiller, we have made settlements in this industry, and we've made them in the private sector. As far as I'm concerned, we still deal with private engineering companies, even cleaning contractors, bus companies, ferry companies, all sorts of people in transport make settlements with our unions, apart from those ones directly controlled by the DFT, and it's in the contract. The service contract that they have with the Department for Transport gives to the Secretary of State ultimate power in the negotiating room, even though he's not there. So the entire project is a conception of the DFT.
And it leads me on quite well to, you said previously to the committee that Scottish Government or Scottish politicians, essentially, it's your impression that they want to resolve the issue, and obviously since then issues have been resolved, but politicians down here want to exacerbate the issue. I wonder if you could maybe elaborate on that, but with any sort of specifics regard to some of the issues at play, whether it's driver-only operation or whether it's Sunday working practices or no compulsory redundancies, etc. What's your take on a different approach? And that obviously applies to Wales and what have you as well.
Yeah, and I think it's true in the devolved authorities in Merseyside and those other areas as well, and London. They do want to find solutions, and I think what we get from the DFT is provocations in language, and also what is put into the documents. But you can also see it the way that they run the railway. When there's a Network Rail strike, they shut Scotland and they shut large parts of Wales, and they choose to run the parts that connect to England. It's quite cynical in my view, the way they work it. And I know, because I've met the Scottish transport ministers and we engage with senior people in transport portfolio, I think it's called, in the Welsh Government, that they are seething about the way they're treated. They don't get an input into what is a GB-wide infrastructure that we all need to connect up our communities and our economies, and they get no say whatsoever from the DFT. It's not a partnership arrangement between the transport ministers or portfolio holders, and we know that the northern mayors are absolutely seething about the transport services they get on non-strike days and strike days. And it seems to me that there is almost a Stalinist obsession, can I say it, in the DFT about central control, and you can see that in the contracts. British Rail would never have tolerated the amount of interference from the Secretary of State. The chairman of British Rail would have been told to get on with running that business and be accountable to bodies like this, and the Minister, of course, and to Parliament, but on a report-back basis, not an interference basis. The DFT is not allowing the Scottish and Welsh authorities to have any influence on this dispute, even though they are completely affected by it.
Sure. And ASLEF or TSSA get anything to add to that? I'm conscious I need to move on to minimum service levels.
I mean, I think we've seen the massive briefing process that's gone on through the media and elsewhere, and it can only be happening from the Ministry and the DFT. And every time that happens, it hampers any ability to realistically sit down in good conscience and try and find a way forward.
So to move on to the introduction yesterday of the minimum service levels legislation, Given the point that Mr Lynch just made about essentially the point I made just in the Chamber as well, that if Anti-West Coast and Transpennine can barely deliver minimum service levels at the best of times at the moment, it's quite something. But what's your take, what's the ASLEF's take to this legislation as it stands?
Quite naturally, we have an antipathy towards it. We will seek to see what legal avenues we can take to challenge it. It won't solve the current dispute, because by the time it comes through Parliament, goes through the Lords and becomes law, and then the various activities associated with it from all the different companies sitting down and agreeing on separate levels, we're an awful long way away from actually having any current impact. What it does do is exacerbate the current situation, but also I don't see how it can operate safely. I remember when there was a National Fire Brigade dispute, we came to as an industry and said we had to run the whole railway as we did normally, otherwise it'd be unsafe. So if you're talking about running the railway partially, you've already decided nationally that it'd be unsafe to do so. We await events.
TSSA?
I heard the Minister selling it across all the airwaves yesterday as a safety measure. I would invite the committee to ask the Transport Minister if he's had any safety concerns during the process of this dispute that would cause him to believe that such legislation is actually necessary.
Okay, and Mr Lynch?
Well, it tickles me that they will put non-qualified people into signal boxes to break strikes, and they'll have safety incidents, which they have every time they have a strike, when managers break the rules and break their competency basis. But it's the unions that are endangering safety. It's the attempt to break the strikes that imports more danger than anything else. And it's an infringement of civil liberties. The right to strike is something that any democratic society will have. If they want to run the signalling system on Network Rail during a dispute in the way that they will, they'll have to get all the signallers to work, and they will command them and conscript them to work. If they were doing that in Putin's Russia or in Iran or China, they would rightly be condemned. Conscripting workers to go to work against their will is an outrage, and that's what this legislation will bring forward, that either we will name them, or the companies will name them, or even the Secretary of State may name individuals that have to go to work on strike days. How that is democratic and free in a free society, I don't understand, and we'll have to challenge it in every way that we can, and it'll have to be repealed as soon as there's a change in government.
And very brief, quick last question, but before we move on to the last question, if you were to have the Secretary of State in front of you or the Rail Minister, what is the one thing you need from them to advance this situation?
I think we've been consistent in saying that it's only the government and the Rail Minister that can take the shackles off the employers in the negotiations. I previously reported to you that we were stunned when we found out that our employers had signed a deal with the government where they couldn't offer more than 2% in pay. We never even got offered the 2% in the last 4 years. Constricting free collective bargaining and then indenturing people if they dare to have a voice in it later on is a very difficult direction for any society.
And do you differ from that view, or?
No, not really.
No. The same? Okay, thanks.
The employers need to be free to negotiate. At this moment they're not.
We may well be asking them that in the next panel.
We'll probably move on to those questions, but Mike, you want to come in on this point too? Yes,
to Frank Ward first. You recently accused the Secretary of State, and I quote, of actively blocking any improvements to a possible deal. Why do you think this Tory government would actively block any improvements to a possible deal?
Mr Lynch said earlier, I think it's something they've inherited from a previous Secretary of State for Transport. This is an agenda that's been pursued by the government, and it's very much anti-trade union, and we've seen the evidence of that yesterday. I think they've been looking for particular disputes that they could hang this particular legislation on, and it's been encouraged over the last 9 months. We've gradually worked towards the situation that we find ourselves in now.
Thank you. And it's same really to Mick Whelan and Mick Lynch. Do you feel they're blocking the deal, and what are the motives?
Yeah, I think they have dictated what the companies say. I don't think they can even deny that. It's there in law. It's in the contract. So, but they've got themselves stuck. They thought that the public would hate the trade unions. They thought this would all go away in June, and instead the reverse has happened, that more unions have joined into campaigns against poverty, and where this is a campaign to drive poverty into our communities, I believe. So last week, and in the run-up to Christmas, I think the whole thing has been choreographed and stage managed so that the action went ahead, so that these announcements could be made according to a timetable, starting with Mr Sunak on Tuesday, I think, and then the announcements of these draconian anti-trade union laws this week, and ending with the choreographed sessions on Monday. So the whole thing has been pre-arranged. It's almost as if there's been some kind of stage director running this dispute. That's why we couldn't make any progress before Christmas, even though I know the companies wanted to. They wanted to come to us with developed proposals, and they were not allowed to by the Department for Transport. And if anyone says that's not the case, they are not telling you the truth. And I'll put that on the record. They have stopped the development of proposals deliberately at every stage in this dispute. And every time we make a suggestion, they have to go and ask the DFT, the 50 people that are working on this, whether they can make a change to the text or indeed the principles of the proposals. And it takes weeks every time.
And yourself, mate.
It's quite obvious from the chronology of what's occurred. I echo Mick's sentiments, but quite simply, our employers know how the rail unions operate. They know that we here are just the faces of the trade unions. We have executive committees and boards who then decide whether things are viable or whether they go to our members. And the very activity of leaking a deal to the press last Friday, before they had the opportunity for it to be properly considered by the trade union to articulate a response back to the industry, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they must have been doing it on the behest of somebody else. Otherwise, why were they set up to fail?
Singling out the DFT, essentially Secretary of State, yes, it's hardwired into the system, isn't it, process? The book lies with them. What's the motivation? What do they need to do to ensure that actually there's a compromise, there's a win-win solution, there's a resolution to this dispute? What steps do they need to take? And why on earth are they driving it? What's the motivation? Your assessment?
Well, it's not. They're not free actors themselves, the DFT. The Treasury has always run this dispute, whether it's been Mr Sunak in his previous incarnation, and the spending limits and all the rest of it. They decided to defund the railway by 2 billion, plus 2 billion in London Transport, and we've got loads of problems over there that have been slightly hidden by the national dispute. But the defunding of the railway system in general is at the bottom of this, and there's an attempt to defund a lot of services, I believe, and that's what is at the heart of all of the public sector disputes at the moment, that they're not funded properly and people aren't paid properly. People are getting poorer every week. But that is a deliberate policy to transfer wealth, I believe, from working people to people who have got money already. It's all part of a game that's being played in front of us, and this is how it plays out in detail. That's their motivation.
Frank?
I've nothing to add beyond what I said earlier. I think the whole thing's been choreographed in order to allow what happened yesterday, for the business secretary to stand up and say we're going to crack down on trade unions. That's the motivation.
It does appear ideological. I hear stories from the government about wanting skilled, high-paid workers, and then their activities across all sectors, not just the rail sector, actually seem to want to challenge vocational people or people with skills and keep them down. The fact that we hadn't had a pay rise for 4 years, we weren't seeking a pay rise for the 2 years of the pandemic. We only went to Mr Heaton Harris when inflation started going through the roof and when it hit 5.2. Now, if our members were demanding a pay rise, not having had one for the previous 2 years when inflation was 5.2, how do you feel when they find last year inflation going to 14% and in massive double digits and possibly going higher than 14% this year? The idea that 4% and 4% for every condition that we've ever had, because that's what the current deal does, right? A 20% pay cut in real terms, right, for no future and no say in what you can do in the future. How could any trade union sell that to anybody they represent? I don't understand it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Greg.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask you all, from the answers you've given so far, it doesn't seem that there is an end in sight for this particular dispute. So if we just take that as read, how much longer can you, your members, the entities that are your respective unions, financially sustain this dispute?
I've said it repeatedly, we're in it for the long haul. Our members will do this because it's their futures for as long as it takes. I rather flippantly said in the press the other day I'd like to see it resolved before I retire. I go in 3 years' time. I'd like to resolve it tomorrow, quite honestly. Our people don't want to be losing picket lines, they don't want to be on strike, and I'd rather go back to doing my day job of trying to rebuild this industry rather than where we are now. But when people want to take away everything that you may have generated over 140 years in one fell swoop, right, and pay you less than you were getting 3 or 4 years ago for it, why would they sign up to that? It's not going to happen, is it?
But specifically to my question, I understand everything you've said.
We can financially sustain this for an awful long time.
And your members?
And our members.
Mr. Ward.
I mean, respectfully, I would probably turn the question on its head and ask how long do you think the DFT can afford to financially sustain the losses that the train operating companies in particular will be incurring as a consequence of this, which they are contractually bound to do, given their hand in actually managing these disputes. As far as our members are concerned, at some point in the near future we're going to be balloting our members, and they'll tell us at that point in time how long they're willing to continue with this, but it's really down to our members. At this moment in time, they seem to have the backbone to continue with this for a long time if necessary. We've had some members out in as many as 9 days straight as a consequence of this dispute, so they are suffering in their pay pocket, and some of them are low paid workers. We hear a lot about train driver salaries and some manager salaries being up at £190,000 and that. The brunt of the changes which have been brought into this industry are going to force down on the lower paid workers. The booking offices are going to close across the country. A lot of those employees are getting paid at around £20,000 a year. A 4% pay offer to them is less than £20 a week as an increase. 4% to someone who's on 200,000 or even $500,000 in the case of Network Rail makes a big difference to them. But £20 a week isn't going to help a lot of our members to address the financial uncertainty that they're facing at this moment in time. But they've still got the backbone to stand up there and say we're not putting up with it anymore.
Okay, I'm going to come back on one point you made to all three of you in a minute, but Mr. Lynch, just on that first question.
Yeah, well, our members have reballoted, all the members, 43,000, and they voted for a further 6 months mandate. We don't want to exercise that mandate. We are looking to develop a settlement, and they will decide ultimately through a referendum vote whether whatever is the final resolution to the dispute. We don't finance our members. We give them some dispute payments, which is money that's collected. They don't get strike pay, so they finance it themselves. So they will make their decisions, but at the moment our action is having the same effect as it did on day one. And we will consider, once we've had the discussions with the government on Monday, we will have the discussions with the companies, and we go to our people and have mass meetings of reps all of the time. So we met 400 reps last week, immediately after the action, and we will meet them again when we get more proposals. So it's not just a diktat. They decide, in effect, through their elected people, the pursuit of the dispute, what action we should take, when we should take a pause, when we should go back to it, when we should have a referendum. So it will be sustained as long as they want it to be sustained.
Okay, so let's just take as a possibility that 6 month mandate goes 6 months. Maybe there's a fresh ballot, maybe it goes longer than that. How much damage do you think from the existing industrial action and potential future industrial action is being done to the railways in the most generic sense, full stop. We know that COVID brought massive damage and that it fundamentally changed habits of customers, of passengers. We're seeing a lot fewer rush hour use, more social use, more weekend use of the railways post-COVID. Add in uncertainty on the part of consumers as to whether the train will even be running because of industrial action. How much damage has been done to the railway, particularly from consumer choice, which then plays to Mr. Ward's point about losses to the operating companies as a result, not just from industrial action but from changed habits? How much damage has actually been done to the railway?
Loads of damage has been done, but as I say, the damage is conceived and controlled in the Department for Transport. This is their project. They knew that there would be an industrial response from the trade unions. They decided to make what they would think as a great leap forward and provoke the workforce and attack the workforce. So the damage has been envisaged in Whitehall by people who know very little about the railway. Rather than trying to get consent and evolution of the railway, they went for this great leap forward, and it's blown up in their faces. So the damage is being conceived by this administration, and they are inflicting the damage. They have also brought forward a set of legislation that they quickly abandoned on the future structure of the railway. Maybe they'll come back to that, I don't know. Maybe there'll be a new transport minister that'll have another idea. So the damage is being caused by the inconsistent and reckless policy of the people that are in control of the railway, which is the current administration. It's not being caused by the workforce, who are prepared to work through change that is considered and agreed rather than imposed.
I understand. You won't expect me to agree with it, but you'll understand.
Well, most people do agree with it. Most people think our rails are in a terrible state and that government policy is useless.
Let me put this into a question. I understand the perspective you're coming from, but surely you must agree that by making the railway uncertain in its operation from the eyes of the consumer, the people who pay a lot of money.
You're talking about when we're on strike and when we're not on strike?
When you're on strike.
What about the days when we're not on strike, when it's absolutely useless as well?
That's a whole other evidence session.
No, it's not. So since the timetable change that came a couple of years ago, the whole thing's been a disaster.
The question is, you must accept that people are being driven away from the railway because of the uncertainty of knowing whether it's running, because whether it's on strike or not, people are going back to their cars, they are going to coaches, they are just not travelling. We've seen the evidence from UK hospitality that the hospitality sector took an absolute bath in December when they're meant to, because people couldn't get into predominantly London.
It's not a question, is it? But I think it's your government's fault, is my answer when you get there.
Driving people away from the railway?
No, you are. Your government.
Right, okay. Mr. Ward.
I mean, clearly, if there's uncertainty about the service, it will drive people away. There's always been uncertainty about the service in the railway in recent years for different reasons. But Mr. Lynch is right. It's the policies of this government that are creating that uncertainty. This dispute is being prosecuted by the Department of Transport. They're making this happen. If they took their hands off the tiller as far as the employers are concerned and allowed them to negotiate with good faith, we could find resolutions to this. They won't do that, and the employers can't negotiate with us in good faith, because any attempt on their part to do so will effectively mean that they won't be compensated for the loss of revenue or for the loss of profits that they're going to, or the fallen profits that they're going to sustain going forward. I also think it's notable actually that despite the fact that we've come through COVID, with all the emergency arrangements, agreements that were put in place, that all of the companies that were under that managed to make profits, managed to pay dividends to their shareholders, never gave pay increases to their workers, and now we're in a situation whereby government are saying we've got to cut back the expenditure on the railway. The answer is let's get the workers to pay for it. This is political, this is not industrial.
To the question, though, the more the railway is not operational because of industrial action, the less people are going to choose to use the railways, even when there is not industrial action, which is going to fundamentally undermine the entire future of the railway, is it not?
Absolutely, and that seems to be government policy.
Mr. Whelan.
I'm going to echo what my colleagues say. I hope to say in a slightly different way, not to bore you all. I'm quite sure we were the stakeholders that campaigned against the RPI increase in fares last year. We're the ones who've they said that we don't want the truncated timetables that are not serving the North West and North East, where some people are only getting one train a day. And we've tried to work within the changing nature of the industry, because it's a 7-day, 24-hour day industry, always has been. But we had seen footfall coming back. We had seen demands even from government departments, particularly Jacob Rees-Mogg, that people don't work from home, and we've seen more and more companies feeling that that wasn't effectively given the productivity that they wanted. So we've seen a growth in leisure travel, and we've seen a drift back post-COVID in normal traffic. But basically the railway itself, because of how it's currently operating, sustaining on a daily basis, isn't attractive. And of course we're going to go into next January where there's going to be a further 5% increase in fares, where we'll see a further increase in what we call transport poverty and people's ability to afford to travel on our railways. So, but is the choice for a trade union, when your employer and the government deliberately causes a dispute, not to react and to do nothing? This was a fully expected political and industrial reaction from the bad actors who set this up in the first place. The companies decided to sign the new contracts in the post-pandemic world knew exactly what they were doing, knew how we organised, how we bargained with them for the last 2.5 decades. The government, in doing what they did, knew that there was going to be a reaction from the trade unions. I think what they didn't expect was us still to be here 6 or 8 months on. But for many people in this industry, this is existential.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jack, you wanted to have a supplementary and then come to Ben for the last
Thank you, Chair.
section.
This is to what Mr Lynch said a few moments ago around reduction of funding to the railways. You just suggested around 2 million. NAO figures show that the amount of government funding to the railways has actually doubled since 2015-16 to 2019-20. So where do you get your figures from?
I get it from the employers. They told me they've been asked to reduce their costs by 2 billion. I get it from the London Mayor, when I go and meet him and the Commissioner for London Transport, says I've been told to reduce my budget by 2 billion. That's what the savings are for. You've increased the funding. It doesn't go to our people. It goes to these private sector operators and to Network Rail. We don't get all the money. The pay bill in the railway industry is quite modest. The staffing is at low levels.
That the government are putting more money into
the government is putting money into it. They'll probably all have to put money into it. I would ask why they put money into the railway and allow rolling stock companies and train operating companies and Network Rail subcontractors to extract billions of pounds of profit since the 90s straight into people's pockets in through dividends. So you'll do the same with health and all the rest of it eventually when you get the opportunity. So you'll fund them, but you'll shovel it into the private sector. That's what you've been doing. They take profits. They made profit every day during the pandemic, and they've made profit on every day of these strikes. They get protected against the loss of revenue, and they've not been affected, bottom line. 2 of the companies are subject to speculators' takeovers, and one of them has been taken over during this dispute. There's loads of money in the railway. It's being made by private sector operators. Get Porterbrook and all them down here and ask them what they've done with all the money. You funded that completely.
A minute ago you suggested that the public are behind you on that. That is not what latest figures show. It shows that public support is waning and that you don't any longer have the support of the public for these strikes. Is that concerning to you?
It depends which poll you read. I went on Good Morning Britain the other day where Richard Madeley was on attack mode. They did a poll shortly after that and said there was 75% support for the RMT. So it depends which poll you read of who's winning this. What was expected in the DFT is that we'd have zero support and we'd be back to work with no strikes by the end of June. Once your friends in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and all these other journals followed me from my house to the station, invaded my children's Facebook pages and all the rest of it, that we would be public enemies number 1. We're not. I'm a more popular person than many of the politicians in this room, unfortunately, for the public. But the fact is that we have got a lot of support. It's difficult to get support during industrial disputes. But if you ask the public, do they sympathise with people getting a decent pay rise? Do they sympathise with the protection of contracts of employment and conditions? They will say yes. It's difficult to get that support going fully during intense industrial action, but there is broad support for all the people that are involved in disputes at this time, and there's very little for the support for the people that are opposing those disputes and trying to make people poorer.
Are you concerned about the increasing number of your members who are now turning out during strike days and turning up to work?
Well, we don't have those. We don't have reports. That's what we would call propaganda. That we're being told that.
No, those are actual figures. So
figures from who?
Figures from Network Rail, figures that are showing that increasing number of members of your unions now are actually turning up to work.
How do they know they're members of my union?
Well, I mean,
that's a protected characteristic.
There are more people
that's
who
a protected characteristic.
Up to work
but how do they know they're members of my union?
There were previously.
But how do they know they're members?
It's a pure fact.
One union has settled.
Sorry?
One union has settled. There are 43,000 people work for Network Rail. 21,000 of them are members of my union. Mm-hmm. So there would be more people at work than not on any strike day.
So anyway, it isn't concerning to you then that more are...
We don't have those reports. I get reports from picket lines all over the country that they are well attended and that the action we take is having the same effect as it did on day one.
Thank you, Chair.
If I could contribute, Chair, briefly.
Yes.
Our reports we're 100% solid. What we are intrigued at, of course, is that on the non-strike days, other grade groups being paid to drive trains and setting the new rate of pay for the industry. So on top of the higher pay than we get, they get £500 a day in LNER. I believe in one of Mr Montgomery's companies, they're getting £300 a day on non-strike days for driving trains when we're not in dispute with them. So if that's going to set the tone and the level of what people should be paid in this negotiation, it will become increasingly interesting.
Frank, you kind of articulated the problem with the percentage increase a moment ago when you compared the wages of a ticket office staff to a senior manager. You're all very experienced trade unions. So I don't know whether you saw the article by two veteran government negotiators, Joe Haynes and Bernard Donoghue, on Friday in the Times, suggesting that a flat rate cash payment reflecting the increase in the cost of living for everybody might be a way to address the pay issue in this dispute. Is that at all feasible in your view? Just very brief, just yes or no answers would do.
Well, there's an element of that in one of the offers that we've got. We're not averse to any sensible proposal. We'll consider it. It depends, what it is. But the format doesn't particularly bother me. We'll see whether it matches up to the problem or not.
Mick, again, we'd give due consideration to any offer that put a dent in the cost of living crisis. We'd be obliged to.
Right.
How we settled the pay claim for our own staff this year, actually, believe it or not. We would consider it, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this morning. Slightly overrun, but we've had a good airing of the issues. You're very welcome to stay for the second panel if you wish. We'll be putting some of the points raised to them. But for now, thank you for your time.
Thank you.